I call this meeting to order at 7:01. Will staff please do the roll call?
Luke Westalker.
Here.
Andrew Stump. Morgan White.
Here.
Gabriel Dussard. Jessica Lemkool.
Here.
Okay, we can now move on to approval of minutes from the previous meeting, so December 3rd. Are there any corrections? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we can now move on to public input. If there's any public input, you can just feel free to walk up to the mic. We value hearing from our community.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
But you're always welcome. And it helps us to know what folks like you are thinking. Thanks.
Now we can move on to presentations. So will Scott please do the staff report?
Good evening, SAC. First off, it's because it's the beginning of the year, we're going through our annual data collection and analysis. We collect energy, water, waste data, and profiles. Most of those go feed into a greenhouse gas inventory. So we'll be profiling a greenhouse gas inventory and then summarizing that data as trends with previous years. So we are in the midst of collecting that data right now. With direction, moving on, carry out bag fee. You may have seen there was a city council meeting and staff was given direction to gather information to develop a proposal for a carry out bag fee. There are a number of similar statutes, or not statutes, ordinances in other cities in Illinois. They're all pretty similar, and so you know, in terms of the terms of such an ordinance, it's probably, I would guess, it would look similar to the other cities. We have just closed our request for proposal for geothermal Urbana-Champaign. We received one proposal, and we'll probably move forward with developing a program with that vendor. So we will be doing some geothermal power hours and other events, and helping folks make it easier, faster, easier, cheaper to get geothermal heating and cooling for their homes and businesses this year. We're also moving on to landfill. We are working on evaluating some additional vegetation control projects on that landfill. It went some number of years without a lot of vegetation control, so there's brush and woody vegetation and trees that we're working to clear and keep clear so that it's just an easy mowable space. One parcel of the landfill is under a lease option for solar development, and so we're not putting any money into that right now because the developer, should they convert that lease option to a long-term lease, would come in and prepare that site and then maintain it thereafter. So we're not focusing on that section right now. We're also looking at, we have our consultant looking at some wells that potentially are not used anymore on our landfill, so sampling wells, extraction wells that are not used anymore may not be useful in the future. And if we make that determination, we'd be closing, filling in, and abandoning those wells so that they're not a pathway for anything at the surface to go down into the shallow aquifer. So a couple things we're working on the landfill. And I mentioned the second solar development on the landfill. Right now, the developer has everything that they need to move forward. They're just waiting on an incentive from the state government as the final piece for such a project. So we're just in line waiting for an incentive. On municipal electric aggregation, we have a contract currently that goes through June of this year, and we expect our consultant will come to us with a good day to get pricing for the next aggregation sometime in the next couple months. We do expect that all prices, the default utility price, the market prices, we expect all prices to be higher, in the next couple of years. So we expect our next contract, while it may be competitive to other offers, will be higher than what we have right now. And finally, U-Cycle. We've done competitive solicitations for our 2 big contracts for collections and processing. That's a multifamily recycling service and curbside recycling service. We've already converted over to the new multifamily recycling service with a new vendor. And we've signed a contract for the curbside recycling service turnover, which will happen, I think it's April 1. So we'll have a new vendor there. And so we haven't had new vendors for these services in many years. So we're just going through that process of, working out how we're going to, dovetail with the vendors' services, their operational procedures. And so that's going to occupy a lot of U-Cycle time for the next few months. Thanks.
Do we have an update on what the new vendor is going to accept for a multifamily currently? Because I know we were talking about plastic bags and things like that.
Yeah, so what is accepted will be the same on both multifamily and curbside. It's not going to include plastic carry-out grocery bags, and it's not going to include 6-pack rings. Those are things we accepted in the past, but there's very weak markets for them, and they do not sort well in mechanical sorting. So they're generally not. I mean, there's really no one else in the U.S. accepting those curbside. We were kind of the last ones, and that's just not going to be possible going forward.
Do we know, are there places, I've noticed sometimes grocery stores will accept them. Do we have places that do accept them that we could?
I think there are. I don't know them off the top of my head, but that sort of information, Courtney Kwong, the recycling coordinator, keeps updated on a webpage on our website called "Where Do I Recycle It?" or something to that effect. And it's just a laundry list of different places you can recycle things that are not accepted curbside.
Does the U-Cycle contract allow for amendments if we are able to pass our resolution and move into discussions about incorporating businesses instead of just multifamily? Obviously that would need to be a contract amendment. Would it need to be an amendment, or would it need to be a new RFP with a new contract?
So any contract can be amended if both parties agree. But I would expect that if the city were to pursue a commercial recycling service, I would expect that would probably be a new RFP. I'd have to think about, from a procurement strategy perspective, we'd have to think about a little bit what the best approach would be. There is some similarity to commercial as there is to multifamily in that it's typically less locations behind a building and larger containers, like dumpsters. So there's some similarities there, but we'd probably review that and look what others do and contemplate it.
How long is this contract again?
I believe both of these are 5 years. These services require a lot of capital equipment, so a packer truck, and that's not necessarily something that the vendors have, just on the lot waiting to be used. So a lot of times they're going to have to go buy, a $250,000, $500,000 piece of equipment, and so to make that work out, it's a little bit longer term than most of our other service contracts.
Are there any more comments on the staff report?
I have another question. I just don't remember. What sort of renewables are in the municipal aggregation?
Right now, we have just a portion of our supply comes with renewable energy credits. Depending on pricing, we always want to try and create enough savings that we can buy up to 100% of our electric supply with renewable energy credits. But we haven't been able to buy 100% the last 2 terms. The margins between the pricing we could get and the default electricity supply price, which is the one we're trying to create some savings from, we're just too small to squeeze in some additional RECs, renewable energy credits.
What's some of the vegetation control that happens at the landfill, and is there any opportunity to incentivize like native plants and things like that?
That is not something we've pursued from the standpoint of right now we don't have enough resources to just keep woody vegetation off of the property. So when we get the property to a point where we're just mowing, grass 4 times a year or whatever, that may be a point at which we can contemplate spending some money, bringing in pollinators. We do talk with I'm trying to remember what we put in. I know we at least mentioned it in our landfill solar 2 solicitation as a potential ground cover. I don't know if it's required or not, but that'll be a conversation we'll have if that lease option converts to a lease with the solar developer as to what kind of ground cover they want to maintain and are willing to maintain. But right now, like, first step is to just get control of the woody vegetation and get a mowing cycle that'll keep honeysuckle from sprouting.
There's actually a concern with prairie plants. You can't really do prairie plants, which are a lot of our native plants here are prairie plants, but they have very long, deep roots. Thank you. And a landfill cover needs to be, like, the intention is to keep water out. And so you don't want to have those roots going and busting through the cap of the landfill and infiltrating water, which we do want almost everywhere else. But in a landfill, there's some special situations, special circumstances. I'd be curious about something more like moss that could cut back on the need to mow as well. But I don't know, I don't think moss keeps out honeysuckle, for example. But that'd be nice to get something that also saves operational costs.
There is a lovely extensive list of places to recycle things on the website that I'm seeing.
It's really nice.
So it's Schnucks, Walmart, and Meijer, according to this, for those plastic bags.
Are we not still considering vendor recycling for use cycle, or is it just limited to family and multifamily?
Right now, U-Cycle has 2 separate services. One is curbside recycling, which is, single-family residents up to 4 attached units, and multifamily residents recycling, which is 5-unit apartments or greater. That's the services we have right now. We've never provided commercial recycling. That's rare. There are some cities that have some, I think maybe some requirements for commercial recycling, but don't provide it. It's a lot more rare. Even multifamily recycling is not extremely common insofar as being provided by a city.
Have there been any updates on any federal funding issues or things that we've been using in the past?
So the city is evaluating any federal funding impacts that may occur from directives with the new federal administration. I'm not following that closely. U-Cycle and my projects are not, don't have federal, well, we do have one federally funded project, but it's not expected to impact that one. The city is following that. It's a day-to-day change. We also have some folks at Public Works who are working with a consultant to evaluate what Public Works, potentially grant-funded priorities are, and work to marry that up with grants that are out there that could fund those projects, and then we'll be moving forward at some point with a strategy to pick a few and compete.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. If not, we can move.
I guess just one thought that I have about the recycling, maybe other places aren't having recycling available from the city to businesses, but maybe we could be cutting edge in that, as we're finding plastic in brains and stuff these days. So just throwing it out there. A lot of trash, just trash. That's all. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so we can move on to unfinished business. So the resolution recommending the City of Urbana prioritize the following climate action goals. So I've already incorporated all of Andy's comments in this, but I'm wondering if there are other things we want to discuss now or comments people had that they didn't email in.
I made a few comments on the Word doc.
Okay. Did you email that to me?
Oh,
1 second. Yeah.
I can just read them off of
Yeah.
my laptop. That's probably easier.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe while he's pulling that up, I did read the draft resolution that was in the agenda packet, and it looked like it incorporated all the things we had talked about in our prior meeting, and it looked pretty ready to go, from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only thing I thought maybe, we know that the lights, like the city asset management plan or whatever with the lights, that's happening. And I feel like throwing that down at the bottom, maybe not, maybe putting some of those other things that we really think would actually, maybe be less likely to happen or more high yield result kind of thing, when we know the light thing is happening. So just, that would be the only thought. It looks really great, and I appreciate all the work that was put into this by people.
Yeah, so then I can move that to the end. Then our last two sections, 12 and 13, then will be the carryout bag fee, which is being moved forward, and then the streetlight asset management plan. So then our first two will be to incentivize businesses to recycle using U-Cycle mixed bins, and then begin an educational campaign to make U-Cycle a more cultural habit. I think with that can be distributing resources like where do I recycle additional items.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's all on. So I just have two here. The first one regards the new administration, particularly how Trump has put an oil CEO in charge of the EPA. And I'm kind of just wondering if there's a way we could work into the plan some way that we could continue to uphold EPA standards, even if the EPA gets weakened by the new administration somehow. Because it's very possible that a lot of, climate initiatives are defunded altogether. And if that impacts this, we can't really just resign. So I don't know if that's beyond the reach of a climate action plan, but if there's some sort of language we could put in there that kind of just incentivizes continued action, even if federal support is.
What if we say it has another whereas clause? Whereas the federal administration changes over time and has different perspectives, we don't have to necessarily call out in particular, just say you know, it's not always going to come down from on high. We're the commission saying this is what the people here want, you know, local action. Whereas the national narrative may be changing, local action is still strong or needs to stay strong. Does that get at what you're kind of referring to?
I think so.
What I'm wondering is how many current state things does Illinois already have that supersede the minimum guidelines set by EPA? So regardless of what happens with the federal, will the state still continue to do those types of things?
One example is the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency refers to the EJ 40 federal legislation. So it says, you know, if you are needing a EPA permit for a construction permit in a environmental justice zone that I believe links out to the EJ 40 national laws, which could be changing over the next few years. The law doesn't change that quickly, but there could be reverberations. So I think there might be a need at the state level, not so much at the city or of Urbana level, but at the state level to have the alternate to that if that's no longer there, the EJ 40 system. And I don't know all of the state ones, but I do know that they refer to some of the federal ones. But our governor is very supportive of addressing climate change and diversity.
I think this is just such a valuable thing to bring up, you know? And I like the idea of whereas maybe we're not calling it out specifically, but we're saying if environmental regulations were to degrade or like the minimum were to kind of lessen in any way, because we know already, like in, you know, the EPA is not actually enforcing all of what they should be enforcing anyway, but we could still uphold like a high standard of environmental protection, even if it were to, if the EPA were to, you know, I don't know what the language is, but degrade or like let me wordsmith for a minute.
I do think it's less so the regulatory alone. It's the whole message from the, you know, federal executive branch. And I think so I don't want us to just focus in on the EPA alone, right? Because it's more than that in my mind.
You're right, it is more than that. It's like just people, energy and manpower and people power getting put into it, you know? So it is it is more than just the EPA, it's true.
I'm also wondering how much of this is federal versus state run. So like the kind of programs we participate in, how many of those will be directly affected?
The only federal funding that I'm working with right now is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. It's not clear whether that's going to be blocked. We will find out in the coming days and weeks. We're going to finish our project, I'm not sure, in a month or 2 or 3, and then we'll be in a position to proceed with filing for the reimbursement, and we'll know for sure then. That's on the order of $60,000 or $70,000. That's pretty small potatoes compared to the other community development and public works grants, and maybe some fire grants and police grants that are probably out there that those departments are watching. But in terms of energy and climate and sustainability, there's just this one, and we're just gonna have to. We've already spent the money and we're doing the project, so there's no opportunity to cut a loss there. We're going to finish the project and we'll see if we still get the reimbursement. I expect we will.
But if you mean things like, can we still do U-cycle? Yes. Can we still do municipal aggregation? Yes. Can we still do solar and geothermal Urbana-Champaign? Yes. So there's a lot that, and that's because it's at that local level, and there's a lot of work that went into those through Scott directly that we're lucky to have him, and we're lucky to be in Urbana. That's kind of my perspective on it. Thank goodness we're here. But I love the idea of adding like, if we did one whereas clause related to this. And maybe it's just the classic think global, act local, that kind of thing.
Kind of just one more little thing I wanted to touch on is, I was at the mayoral debate, and Williams touched on it a little bit, but not so explicitly. And I'm just wondering if we can because it's in the Imagine Urbana plan, but like for the next 5-year plan, if there was some way that we could prioritize kind of developing like the Lincoln Avenue corridor, because I mean, it's rather specific when compared to some of the other points, but it seems like such a kind of critical artery for the city in terms of generating revenue and just like somewhere that we could improve. I don't know if there's any way, if that's too specific,
No, talk about more about what you're thinking there.
Oh, I think maybe a lot of the Imagine Urbana kind of increased zoning and just global goals they've set seem like very ambitious. And if this is only a 5-year climate action plan, right? So this is for the next.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's wide open. There's no decisions
okay.
made at this point.
Okay. But I mean, I guess just in terms of kind of order of magnitude, or like how much it would mean for the city, if there would be a way to kind of like prioritize urbanizing and like incentivizing kind of mixed use on arteries like Lincoln or Philo, or just kind of like developing those areas in a way that may mitigate sprawl for the future.
Like a sustainable land use development pattern.
Yeah. Is that already kind of encompassed in there?
I think that's part of what Imagine Urbana is trying to get at.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that to that point, it's not one of our specific items.
Right.
Like we have, stuff about vehicles and energy and trees. We don't really have something about like the smart growth
And we'd have to
multi-district zoning.
rezone large areas in order to build mixed use, right? So that might be a longer term.
Well, it could be just a statement along the lines of, like, I'm just trying to think what we would actually add to the resolution.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be, another section, but prioritize the the inclusion of mixed-use development in urban areas, such as, I don't know if we would say such as or not to get into the specifics, but we could. It's the include, if we can add a statement saying prioritize mixed-use development in the city.
Okay. That would probably kind of get at
It ties back to the Imagine Urbana.
Yeah.
It helps in all kinds of ways, sustainability, to have people, being able to walk to get their groceries and.
Right, yeah, naturally.
So with that, it's the walkability. Would we also want to have a comment on things like rainwater stuff or trees and planting in green areas if we're adding this section, or do we just want to keep it very simple and just say mixed-use development?
I would keep it simple. Okay. We have trees, but that's my opinion. Go ahead.
I like the idea of mentioning that. I mean, I get so the concept is to maximize the spaces we've already taken up, is like what you're saying, right? But maybe doing that with kind of the environment in mind. I don't know. But yes, I see what you're saying, Morgan. I also see what you're saying in terms of just like the whole maximizing. I love the idea, Luke, of mentioning if we were to such as or include some ideas, it would be great if they were buildings that were built with the environment in mind and green spaces included and infrastructure that's gonna last and, you know.
So something we can do for going back to the previous point, we can have a whereas, where it's whereas federal policies and practices pertaining to the environment, energy, and health fluctuate on a 4-year cycle. And then do we want to have a section that has the city of Urbana maintaining like the highest levels of sustainability, or how would we want to phrase that? Or what's a good way of taking action to the constantly fluctuating federal policy?
Maybe it's just, I guess I'm thinking of the phrase at the local level. Maybe it's another, whereas sustainable the sustainability movement can have more, I'm not sure about the beginning, but at the local level.
Yeah.
Like grassroots kind of stuff, but the benefits of sustainability are at the community level, and therefore action at the, rambling a little bit there.
I'm just over here thinking of sentences, yeah. So something like, whereas either what you said or political landscapes may change, resulting in degradation of EPA standards, lack of focus on environmental concerns, Urbana as an entity will still continue to prioritize the environment or prioritize and
Yeah,
honor.
can still.
And you could say something like, be willing to uphold and go beyond EPA standards, because, I mean, if they fall to some certain level where the maximal standard is not really sufficient, then you could, maybe language like that would kind of incentivize even more progressive.
It's hard, Luca's gotta be hard wordsmithing over there from all these peeps.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this is not something we'll pass tonight, so I'll draft it, we'll send it out, and then maybe the next meeting we can vote and approve if it sounds good. Is that an okay plan?
I think that's a great plan.
Okay.
I think in the whereas, we would say the city can do these things. They can't stop us. This is Urbana.
Yeah, or the city will. Can feels passive.
But in a
you know?
whereas, it has to be, whereas is the passive side, and the resolution is, these are the things that you should,
Got you,
that we
okay.
want them to do. We
New
can't.
to my world, yeah.
I believe that as a commission, we can pass a resolution recommending what the city council would do, but it's still a recommendation, so we can't say that this will happen.
Got you.
Our section 1 can just be like Urbana should uphold something, something, and just start it off as that, and then we go into specifics, so.
It can be a beacon of light in the darkness
Like when all their lights go out.
with LEDs.
Any other thoughts?
I do have a question for Scott. On the tree side, I don't remember, but it's a very large number of vacant tree spaces, right? Is it possible to do that in the time frame which we had proposed?
It's something on the order of 4,000 vacant tree sites.
And is that like, now that there is a newly expanded staff capacity in the Arbor Crew, 4,000 by 2028? Probably. Maybe.
It would require redirecting some resources from catching up on pruning maintenance to planting.
I feel more comfortable, though, knowing that it's 4,000 and not 40,000.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's certainly a number that you can wrap your head around in some number of years, getting to a kind of a one in, one out situation. But it would, you know, we would be talking about doubling the number of tree plantings in each year. It's a lot. That's a lot. And we don't want to, we're already behind, or we got behind for a few years in a maintenance cycle, you know, the best practice maintenance cycle. And so it'd be good to catch up on that maintenance cycle. There's probably a balance to be struck between, you know, catching up on the maintenance cycle and if resources are available, advancing on getting vacants planted out.
For the timeline for plastic bags, we have 2026. For the streetlights, it's also 2026. And then vacant trees is 2028. Do those all seem reasonable and correct?
I mean, approximately, like, how many trees are we planting a year now?
I think it's something on the order of 100.
100.
So there's, you know, there's something like, just in big general numbers, something like 80 removals for one reason or another every year and 100 plantings. And so we're making tiny incremental progress every year on advancing, getting the vacants planted out.
4,000 by 2028 would be quite a task then.
I don't think it's happening, right? How could it happen, really?
What's a better way?
Here's how it could happen. Funding from a foundation could provide the cost of the trees and paying for the installation through a grant where it's someone else is installing them and our arbor crew is just helping them understand where to go and which types of trees. So it would be finding the funding and contracting to have it done and getting it done in 3 years. That's plausible.
And then keeping them alive after they're planted.
Well, that's the other side of it, right?
Some of those planting contracts, I don't know if this is still the way it's done, but at least at some point in time, those planting contracts would be plant and keep it alive for 12 months or 24 months or something. And so there would be some watering that comes with. Whether that's still the way it's done or not, I don't know. And of course, pricing is everything. Who knows if that's been inflated to the point where it's not affordable.
Okay, so we're filling 20 sites a year.
Addition, you know, net positive.
Net positive.
Something like that. I don't have exact numbers.
And there are like 4,000 sites that need that filled. So that's 200 years at that rate. Okay, cool.
So if you think in terms of a decade, you know, a city can plan on a decade basis and divide 4,000 across 10 years, that's an additional 400 a year. So that's a dramatic increase. But it's a lot nicer to think about things, you know, a big effort over the course of a decade. And also a decade gives you a year to kind of figure out your funding source and figure out your, you know, how you're going to manage it in terms of vendors and staff. So that might be a better time scale to think about it.
Like 2035? We could also have a shorter term one where it's like fill 1,000 vacant tree sites, if that seems better for this.
Maybe something like fill half of all vacant tree sites by 2030.
30.
Yeah, maybe 2030, but still, again, setting a goal with, like, how is it actually going to happen, you know?
I mean,
Also, just the tree, you know, I know oak trees have been struggling a lot lately with our changing climate, and I'm sorry to go just down, like, negative on it, but just concerned for the trees and all the living things, that's all. Back to that. 2,000 by 2030. Finding an alternate source and some grants and some,
I think the resolution
Outside.
would just say the 2,000 by 2030. We pass the resolution and then we start figuring out how we make that happen and
right.
get people like our audience members to help us figure that out. And
Great, okay, yeah,
and maybe it's seed, maybe we're planting acorns with permission, right?
right.
And I can have, instead of appropriate all necessary resources, I can say appropriate and find, and just encourage us.
I know this is kind of a Band-Aid, but I guess like around a year ago, I was kind of looking for volunteer opportunities to plant trees, and there really aren't that many, because so the park district has Fresh Crew, but a lot of what they do is kind of cutting honeysuckle. But I imagine if the goal were to plant trees, you could kind of repurpose that towards planting trees, or have just host a few with tree plantings, and that might make a small dent with some volunteer labor.
I was totally thinking along the same lines of some sort of like native tree, something. We could probably get that from some sort of foundation, deals on native trees, and then some community, like teach people how to plant trees correctly, and then, I don't know.
Yeah, and those have happened. Those could definitely happen again. We had a community donation, I think it was $10,000 towards trees sometime in the last 5 or 6 years. And I know the U of I Extension and Forestry departments, two different groups, partnered with like the local Rotary to plant trees. It was a location on campus right across from Clark Lindsay at Windsor and Race. And I remember because I got to go help plant some trees. And I was like, I know which one I planted. So I think there's a lot of opportunity like that as well.
It can be done. It can be done.
Anything, we can do it. Just don't give up.
Anything else on the plan? Is there any new business? If there's nothing else, I can adjourn the meeting. So the meeting is adjourned, 7:44.